I'm going to get you to do a bit of discussion in kind of small groups in a second, but just let me frame that first discussion. According to the data, 25% of people in the UK are disabled. I don't know if that statistic surprises you, but it's pretty high. So that's 11% of children, it's 23% of working age adults, and it's 45% of those of retirement age and above. That is a large group of people. We can often think about this as a kind of slightly niche thing for one or two, but actually this is statistically, if it's not the people that live one side of you, it's the people who live the other side of you. This is something that we will all experience in different ways with people we know, so it's worth thinking about together. In the light of that then, here's a question to discuss. Don't do it in massive groups, because otherwise you won't get time to share, because you've only got like 3 or 4 minutes. So turn to maybe just the person next to you, or maybe in a 3. What experience have you had with people with disabilities or with disability yourself? 2s or 3s. Do that for 3 minutes. We're basically this evening going to think about 4 different equalities. That's going to help us move through this material. We're going to think about 4 equalities. Here's the first. All people are equal in creation. All people are equal in creation. So verse from Genesis 1 on your screen, on the screen behind, well-known, famous verse. Genesis 1:27, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Now, this is before the fall, this is before the world breaks. Disability isn't a thing in the world at this point. But there is no caveat in that verse. There is no caveat that says, if you are sufficiently able. All people are in the image of God. That's what that verse tells us. Male or female, all people in God's image. But the question the verse naturally leads us to ask is, what does the image of God mean? And people, theologians and others, kind of debate this, and they come up with a few different ideas, and some people use 3 different R's because people like things that alliterate. Some people talk about rule. So if you go on to the next verse in Genesis 1, what you would see is that we're told that God blesses Adam and Eve, and he says to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, and so on and so forth. And so they say, well, if the image is listed in verse 27, and then in verse 28 we're told to go and rule, what it is to be in the image of God is to be rulers. We are rulers under God. Other people will argue for rationality. That is, we can think, we have minds in a way different from any other animal. And God is a thinker, he is the first thinker, and so maybe it's that we are rational like God is rational. Or maybe it's relationality. God is relational in himself, Father, Son, and Spirit. God has always been in perfect relationship. And so maybe what makes us in the image of God is that we have the ability to form relationships distinct from how animals do it. These are the kind of ideas that people discuss. But there's a problem with all of those ideas. And the problem is simply this. Every single one of those is something that different people are more or less able to do. And what that therefore means is if the image of God is predominantly any of those things, some people are more in God's image, and by implication worth more, and others are less in God's image, and therefore worth less. If the image boils down to how well you can rule, those who have particular abilities to rule over creation would be more in the image of God. If it's more about rationality, those who are able to think better are more in the image of God. If it's about relationality, those who are better socially are more in the image of God. So if any one of these becomes primary, you end up with a situation where some people are more in God's image and others are less so. And that is not right. We're going to be helped to think about what it is to be in the image of God with 3 different quotes from different authors. I've picked 3 because they work at slightly different levels. You can pick which of the 3 you find most helpful. The first one's going to be a bit more philosophical, the second's a bit more simple, the third's a bit more visual, so whichever one works for you. The first will be on the screen, I'll read the third. Nancy Pearcey, in her excellent book Love Thy Body, says this: the Christian concept of personhood depends not on what I can do, but on who I am. That I am created in the image of God. Human beings do not need to earn the right to be treated as creatures of great value. Our dignity is intrinsic, that means within us, rooted in the fact that God made us. If you want to boil it down, what is she saying? Well, Sandra Peoples helps us with that. The image is about who man or woman is, and not just what man does. To be in God's image is not about something we earn by doing and performing and achieving. It is something God bestows on us by gift. Here's the more visual quote, if it's helpful. G.K. Chesterton, he says this. It's a longer quote, which is why it's not on the screen. People are equal in the same way pennies are equal. Some are bright, others are dull. Some are worn smooth, others are sharp and fresh. But all are equal value, for each penny bears the image of the sovereign. Each person bears the image of the King of Kings. Do you see what he's saying? You can get 2 pennies out of your purse, wallet. One can be from the 1990s and be really kind of old and worn, and one can be a brand new, fresh 2026 minted penny. And you take them into the shop, and they are both worth exactly the same. And if we were doing this talk 15 years ago, you'd actually be able to buy something for that. Now you can buy nothing. Sorry about that. But what is it that gives each of those pennies equal value? It is not how they look. It is not something in them. It is the fact that they have been stamped by the royal mint with the image of the king that says, this is worth 1 penny because I say so. So too with us. Some people are bright and shiny. Others more worn. But each of us has had the image of God stamped on us, and so we are equal in God's sight. Every person is equal in creation. That is not to say that those 3 R's that we thought about don't have some element of truth to them. They are just not primary. They are not what defines the image of God. Being in the image of God is not about being human in a certain way or achieving certain functions. If you are part of the human species, descended from Adam and Eve, you are in the image of God. You bear God's image fully, equally, everyone. But, sadly, that has not been a view that has been held well throughout history. We're going to see how was true in a pre-Christian age. We're going to see how that's true in a post-Christian age. And we're actually going to see how the church got it wrong along the way as well. So let's think about that. Let's think about pre-Christian voices. See, if you go to the world before Jesus, the kind of late BC, whatever that, 100 years, 200 years before Jesus. And you look at the thinkers of the time, Greek philosophers, and I'm aware I'm playing into stereotypes because I'm from Oxford and I'm about to quote some Greek philosophers, I'm sorry about that. What you see is them saying a bunch of things, and they don't say those things as if they're saying, this is, I guess, the way the world is, and we all have to just accept it. They are saying this is good, this is right, this is how the world should be. Here's a couple of examples. Plato, very famous philosopher, he said this: the state should leave the unhealthy to die, and those whose psychological condition is incurably corrupt, it will put to death. This is one of the greatest thinkers in the history of the Western world, apparently. And he says, the state functioning well, our government doing their job properly, should let unhealthy people die, and those who can't fix their own minds, it should actively kill. He says that's good. That's justice. That's survival of the fittest, basically. That's a bit too philosophical. Thucydides, he says it much more to the point. The strong do what they have the power to do, and the weak must suck it up. And again, he doesn't say that saying this is so rubbish and this is just how the world works, and if it was different. But he says that's how the world should be. So many people throughout history have not treated everyone equally. That was true before Jesus came along and brought with him a revolution. It is sadly increasingly true in a world, or in our part of the world, that is withdrawing from Christian values. You see it in things like current abortion policy. Current abortion policy in the UK is that any child can be aborted up to 24 weeks, or up to birth for, and I quote, severe fetal abnormality, which is code for certain disabilities. If your child is disabled past a certain level as determined by the government of the day, it is fine to abort that child right up to birth. There is clear discrimination, clear lessening of the value of those lives. And some of the thinkers in our world would say that birth shouldn't mark a change to that. What I mean by that, Peter Singer is a very famous ethicist. That means he thinks about moral issues. He is the professor of bioethics at Princeton University. That is a very high-end American university. He is not a kind of random fringe figure. He is well thought of in academia. He says this: the disabled baby has less self-awareness than a pig, cow, or chicken. The doctrine of the sanctity of life has never prevented man from killing pigs, cows, or chickens. So man can also kill disabled babies. That is a shocking thing to say, but there is logic to it. And his logic is this. His logic states, birth shouldn't change anything. The child in the womb is a living being. The child out of the womb is a living being. And if we are happy to say that children in the womb with certain disabilities have less value, what about the children who we can't work out what's wrong with them until they come out? Once you get rid of the image of God, and you only value people by what they can do, that kind of argument naturally follows. But the Bible says we are all equal in creation, because we all have the image of God stamped on us. It's easy to poke the world out there and say how they've got it wrong. But we need to own the fact that the church has got this wrong at times. Church history is littered with a number of pretty horrible statements. Martin Luther is a man that a number of Christians in our kind of circles look up to, and he did lots of wonderful things. I'm so thankful to God for Martin Luther. And yet once Martin Luther was asked about whether or not to baptise disabled infants. Now, hey, I have an answer for why you shouldn't baptise a disabled infant. It has nothing to do with their disability. But he was asked whether we should baptise disabled infants. It's worth noting, he says different things at different times, so it's quite hard to pin down his exact view. But here is what he said to that at one point. No, they should not get baptised, because I hold that they are only animal life. That is a shocking thing to have said. And those kind of things sit within the history of the church. So we just need to recognise that. That it's not just the world out there says things and we've got it right all along. The scriptures are clear. But when we move away from what the scriptures have to say, normally when we start to buy the idea that there is some form of ability that defines the image of God, we will end up falling into these kinds of traps. But God says no. We are all equal in creation. Whatever your ability, your value is not in question. So for us as a church, what does it look like to be distinctive? Just think back to the people you discussed in your groups. Maybe it was you, maybe it was others you know within the church, or friends and family. I don't know what it will look like for each of you to treat that person as one in God's image. But the call is to do so. Don't look down on noses at them. I don't think we're better somehow, or more worthy of attention or energy, because we are all equal in creation. That's our first big equality. It's also our longest by far. Here's the second. We are all equal in fallenness. We are equal in fallenness. In John chapter 9, you get that story of the man who's born blind. And in that passage, the disciples come to Jesus and they say, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Because the assumption is that if this has gone wrong in his life, it must be either his fault or his parents. But they think, how could it possibly be his fault because it came from birth, so it must be his parents, I guess. Here's what Jesus said. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. That is, you cannot draw a line between someone's disability and their sinfulness, as if to say that people who are disabled are somehow more sinful. Jesus says, no, that line doesn't exist. Stop trying to draw it. We are all equally fallen. Yeah. Disability is not a judgment of God that falls on some and not others. Now, my hunch is, and I don't know you guys, so I'm guessing somewhat, none of you are very likely to look at someone who is disabled and go, well, it must be because they are more sinful than others. As a parent of a disabled child, let me tell you how people genuinely, unintentionally, get quite close to sounding like that. If you ever see someone who's got a disabled child and you say something like, oh, well, the Lord is really using this trial to grow their patience. Do you know that sounds an awful lot like? And again, I know it's not meant. It sounds an awful lot like, I guess I was patient enough that I didn't need something like this, but they needed to grow in patience. That is just worth knowing. I don't think we fall into the trap of thinking that disabled people are more fallen, nor their parents, but I think there are ways in which we can sometimes accidentally sound like that. And I think I can say that fairly freely, as we've been genuinely unintentionally on the wrong end of it. Hopefully that might be helpful to you. What I think we are more in danger of in our current culture is thinking that disabled people are less fallen. Let me explain what I mean by that. Particularly thinking about those with learning disabilities, it is quite easy to fall into the mindset that basically says they can't help it. Now, sometimes, all the time, life is way, way, way harder for a lot of those people. And so we want to be really generous and kind and sensitive and understanding. But there is a version of the way we can talk about this that basically implies that person really has no accountability before God. And what you have actually done in that moment is you have demeaned them. You have basically said they are not able to, they have no agency. They can't change how they are, they just are. And what you therefore basically said is the Spirit can't change them. Disabled people, and particularly at this point those with learning disabilities, they are people made in God's image, they are accountable to Him. Godliness might look drastically different for them, completely different to all of our stereotypes, and we need to be open to understand that. But we need to not get to the point where we're basically saying, oh, they just are, and the Spirit can't change them. They can't grow. The thing is, the wonderful thing is, the Spirit of God is powerful and can change anyone. He can change each of us. He can change anyone's life. He can grow them to be more like Jesus in whatever that will look like for them. And it might look completely different to anything we've seen before. But He can, and He does. We are all equal in fallenness because we are all broken people. Every single one of us is a broken person. Michael Beetz, in a book I'll talk a bit about later, he says this: disability is a visible representation of a spiritual reality. That is, when you see a disabled person, you see brokenness. What that is meant to do for you is to go, spiritually, I am just as broken as they are physically. It is meant to remind you of what you are like before God. So much of the Gospels is Jesus going around and healing disabled people. Why? Because it shows us, partly this is compassion, partly it is there to show us that Jesus has the power to deal with our spiritual brokenness. Disability is a visible representation of a spiritual reality. We are all broken people. Michael Beetz goes on, we are broken and weak in every area of life. Relationally, physically, spiritually, morally, and emotionally. The most difficult of these areas to hide is the physical. That is to say, every single one of us has emotions that are broken and wrong, but we can hide them. Every single one of us makes moral decisions that are dreadful, but we can hide them. Every single one of us does not relate to God as we ought, but we can hide it. Every single one of us doesn't relate to others as we ought, and we can hide it from at least some people, not the person we're directly relating to. The one that is hardest to hide is the physical. They are not more broken. They are just differently broken. Broken in more obvious ways. We are all equal in creation. We are all equal in fallenness. Thank you. Let's move on. We've thought about equal in creation. We've thought about equal in fallenness. That's questions. Equal in salvation. I'm going to take you to one of my favourite passages in the Bible. It's not 2 Samuel 4, but we need 2 Samuel 4 for context. 2 Samuel 4 says this. Jonathan, I'll explain all the context stuff. If you want to turn to 2 Samuel 9 now, that would be helpful if you've got a Bible. While you do, I'll read 2 Samuel 4 because that's down the screen. Jonathan, son of Saul. So Saul was the king, Jonathan was his son. They both die in battle. Jonathan is best friends with David, who becomes king. That's what you need to know, if this makes sense. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. That's the news that they both die. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is not born with a disability, but in the panic and the rush of all that happens that day, he is dropped and he becomes disabled. That's the context we need to know. Now 2 Samuel 9. I'm going to read the whole chapter. It's not a very long chapter. David asked, "Is there anyone still left at the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" And he loved Jonathan. Jonathan was his closest friend. Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They summoned him to appear before David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "At your service," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "He is at the house of Machir, son of Ammiel in Lodabar." So King David had him brought from Lodabar, from the house of Machir, son of Ammiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honour. David said, "Mephibosheth." "At your service," he replied. "Don't be afraid," David said to him, "for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table." Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belongs to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servants will do whatever my lord the king commands his servants to do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. Let me just walk you through that story. Verse 1. David longs to show kindness. The word behind that word kindness is the word that's often translated kind of abounding love, steadfast love. You know that word that appears loads of times in the Bible talking about God. He abounds in steadfast love. David longs to show that kind of God-shaped love. And then he finds out there's one he can. Verse 3. Ziba answers. Do you notice what Ziba doesn't do? He doesn't name Mephibosheth. He doesn't even deem Mephibosheth worthy to be named. The only thing that marks out Mephibosheth in Ziba's mind is his disability. That's what defines him. not his name. Verse 4, there's a detail, we'll miss this in the English naturally. Where is he? He's at the house of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lodabar. Lodabar is Hebrew for no thing. This is the person who has no name, who is from the back end of nowhere. There is nothing that Mephibosheth has in him, outwardly, that is attractive. He's not worth naming, thinks Ziba. He lives in a non-place. He's the no one from nowhere, but he is brought up from nowhere, from the non-place. And what is he offered? Verse 7. He is offered to always eat at the king's table. That's a glorious picture of salvation, and we'll think more about that in a second. Notice how Mephibosheth responds. What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? It feels like strange language. But here's the thing, what Mephibosheth has almost certainly done is internalised a lifetime of how people have treated him. Many disabled people would feel like this because they've spent their whole lives being told they're worthless, and so they've internalised that thought. Mephibosheth, he thinks he's worthless. Why on earth would he be bestowed with this kind of honour? But verse 11, he is adopted into David's family, into the family of the king, to always eat at his table. And how does the chapter end? With a reminder of just how undeserved this is. What does Mephibosheth bring to the table? Nothing. He's lame in both feet. I love 2 Samuel 9 because it sets a better vision for how to treat the disabled. But I love it even more because it is a picture of ultimate reality. It is a wonderful picture for us of the gospel. God's king longs to show kindness to the undeserving, to the people who bring nothing to the table, to those who have nothing to offer him, to those who don't deserve to be there. He loves to reach out to people and to adopt them into his family, that they may always eat at his table. To welcome in the no ones, to welcome in us, and to welcome us to the final meal table. The new creation, the glorious future hope that we have, is often pictured as a wedding banquet. And in one of the parables, Jesus says this, go out quickly into the streets and the alleys of the town and bring the poor, the crippled, the blind and the lame. Those are the kind of people that God wants to bring into his wedding banquet. The final glorious new creation where we are heading is not filled with people who have earned their way there. It is filled with people who are there by grace. And as here, David welcomes in Mephibosheth. It is a picture for us of what we are all like before God. How little we bring to the table. And yet how delighted he is to welcome us in. How he goes out of his way to find us, to show us kindness, to bring us up from nowhere, to give us a new name, to welcome us into his family. Time after time, Jesus goes after the down and the out. The only criteria for needing saving, for being saved, is that you know you need saving. It's not anything you bring to the table. And so, the person who comes in, who has nothing physically to offer, is just as welcome at the table of the king. And actually, often it is those who have some level or profound levels of disability who understand this better than the rest of us. Because they understand how little they have to offer. They've learned what it is to depend on another. To know that they need help. And yet, there are so many disabled people who we aren't reaching. And that's true with everyone. But here's a staggering statistic. I don't know if you kind of know the language of kind of unreached people groups. So you take a people group, you lump them together, so people with a certain ethnicity or tribal background or whatever it is, and you kind of work out what percentage of them are Christian, and then you work out if they're under a certain percentage, they're what's classified as an unreached people group. If you were to classify disabled people globally as a people group, they are not only unreached, they are the biggest unreached people group in the world. And yet those are the kind of people that God's heart goes out to. They are hard to reach. Like, let's be honest, a number of them are hard to reach. There are profound challenges and difficulties in working out how we share the gospel with people who have such limited understanding in a number of cases, or who find the prospect of coming to church absolutely overwhelming. But it's not impossible. It's difficult. It's not impossible. Sandra Peoples, in another book I'll talk about later, she says this: the extras that people with disabilities may need at church can feel like too much. I love her honesty. And many churches think they've already reached their limits. And as a pastor, I'm like, yep. But, she says this: we modify lessons. We provide noise-reducing headphones. We give support to those who are dysregulated. Why? So that they can hear and have an opportunity to respond to the gospel. Because everyone is welcome at the table. None of us bring anything to it. We are equal in salvation. And fourthly, we are equal in the church. Let's think about 1 Corinthians for a moment. Paul writes a couple of letters to this church in Corinth, 1 Corinthians and then 2 Corinthians. And one of the big problems of the church in Corinth is that they really value power and impressive performance and skill and ability. And I think we're probably more like them than we like to think. They are obsessed with strength and power and things like that. And Paul says this: God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are. Things that are not. It's that same language actually that comes out of 2 Samuel 9. The not thing. Lo-debar. God chose the lowly things of this world, despising the things that are not, to nullify the things that are. God does not choose the impressive. He chooses the lowly, the non-things, the despised things, and that is so often how the disabled feel. They are the kind of people that God chooses, not exclusively. And they aren't just chosen because they are disabled, but so often this is the kind of person that God looks for. They are equal in the church. This is an issue the Corinthian church really struggle with. So Paul's second letter, he's still basically hammering the same point. And he says, guys, you not get it? We have this treasure in jars of clay. We are weak. We're not meant to look impressive. We shouldn't look around our church and think, I wish there were more impressive people here. Because God chooses to put this treasure in jars of clay. Or in 2 Corinthians 12, he chooses to make his power perfect in weakness. And so we should never ever give off the impression that a disabled person is less welcome because they bring less to the table. The church is not meant to be about the impressive. But being honest for a moment, I know all those things are true, and I can tell you and I can stand here, they're all true, and yet I know what my heart is like. So rather than telling you where you might be tempted to fall into this trap, let me tell you about me. I'm on sabbatical at the moment. I have 11 weeks away from church. I've got about 8 weeks left. In 8 weeks, I'm going to go back, and given the nature of church life, but also the kind of transient city I work in, almost certainly when I get back, there are going to be people at church who are new, who've arrived while I've been away. As I imagine that thought, who do I want those people to be? Who am I hoping turns up? The young couple with loads of capacity to fill loads of rotas? The family with kids, because we could do a few more in our Sunday school? Someone with lots of preaching experience, so I can have a bit more of a break? Do you know who doesn't feature on my list? Someone who is profoundly disabled. who brings no obvious practical resources, who is never going to go on a rota in their life, who, and I would never articulate it like this, but in my darkest moments it gets close to the person who is a time drain who will never give anything back. That person is not on my list. And if they should be on anyone's, they should be on mine. We are so easily tempted to slip into a mindset that says that we want things that look impressive. And God says, stop being so Corinthian. I choose the weak and the lowly. Your specifics will be different, but I guess similar heart attitudes are there for you as much as they are for me. Within the church, we are members of one body. Paul says that in 1 Corinthians 12. He says there should be no division in the body. Its parts should have equal concern for each other. The point of the body image is to say each part has a place. Some do kind of more visibly important work, others do less. But they are all equally important in God's economy, whether they're valued by society or not. Matthew Rycroft was the UK ambassador to the UN, which until I came across this quote, I didn't even know that was a job, but apparently it is. He was in a debate in the UN and he was opening the debate, and it's a discussion about children in armed conflict and how we deal with this issue that so many children get put into wars. He says this: how a society treats its most vulnerable, whether children, the infirm, read disabled, or the elderly, is always a measure of its humanity. Let me change a couple of words. How a church treats its most vulnerable, whether children, the infirm, or the elderly, is always a measure of its, I don't know how you've done that sentence, grasp of who God is and where his heart goes. The church is called to be a place where everyone is welcome. Because in Christ, everyone is equal. And there are huge blessings to having the disabled in our midst. Michael Beats, disabled people serve as physical, tangible reminders of who we really are. And I said that earlier, as we look at someone with a struggling with a disability, it reminds us that we are just as dysregulated in our relationship with God as they might be in the particular social situation they find themselves. We are just as unable to get to God as the person in the wheelchair is to get up and walk. They are there to teach us, to drive us to Christ, to make us realise how much we need him. And here's one of the other blessings of disabled people. They make us slow down. We live in a hyper-fast world where everything is now, efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. Spending time with the disabled is not efficient. But God doesn't actually ultimately care that much about efficiency. I say as someone who really likes it. God cares about how we treat people, not how fast we treat them. We are equal in creation, all of us. We are equal in fallenness, all of us. We are equal in salvation, all of us who have come to Christ. And all those who come to Christ, who are equal in him, are equal in the church. Go back into groups, a couple of questions. We'll do that for 5 minutes, and then any chance for you guys to ask me any questions you want to as we close.
Could you give us an example of a church where you've seen them put these 4 equalities well into their church?
Yeah, our chutney. We're working some of it through.
So Paul's
it's really hard to do well, and there is no right way of doing it. So let me put some of those things in place. So it's very hard to be accessible to the person who you haven't yet met because you don't know what needs they have. So the best way to be accessible is to be prepared to change within certain parameters. as people come through the door. So I've seen some examples of some churches do things really well for their particular needs within their context. But I've not seen a church, I think, they've universally nailed this, but I don't think I would expect to, because, I say, everyone's different. And you've got limitations. So you guys are fairly limited in exactly how the building works. And so that might mean there are certain things that feel inaccessible, but you can't really do anything about it. So I've seen some churches, I'm not going to name which ones are good and bad, because I think that's quite fair. But yeah, they've thought it through well, and they've tried to do it. That gives me as good a chance as I need to talk about this book. This is I tell you pastors to read a book, right? That's what you all want me to do. Accessible Church, a gospel-centered vision for including people with disabilities and their families. Sandra Peoples is excellent, I quoted her. She is pretty realistic. My one asterisk is she's still American, and she says things like, oh, and if you've only just started a small church plant and there's only 120 people there, you're like, and when you have your sensory room, and you're like, okay, sure, yeah, maybe one day. But with those couple of caveats in place, she is really good at articulating a vision for what this might look like and giving lots of practical examples. So get someone on your leadership team to read that. That would be one way to start thinking about it in your context. But yeah, I think it is so context dependent. I can tell you one thing, I can tell you a couple of things we've done, not because we've nailed it, but because we're working with some specifics for our context. Makaton is like an assisted sign language. It's not sign language because it's not for deaf people. It's like an extra way of using signs on top of language. That might be useful for our son in the future. So we've changed all of our song actions, kids song actions, to Makaton, because it's actually a relatively low cost thing to do. You're doing some actions anyway, let's turn it into an actual language that is understood and apparently used by 1 million people in the UK. So there's things like that we've done. Here's one top tip. Make it someone's job to work out where the quiet spots are in your church, so that if you notice a visitor who you think might struggle with loud noise, they can sit there. So the way every speaker system works is there's quieter and louder spots within the room. We sit under a speaker because that's the quietest place to be, because that really helps our son. So there are some like really small things you can do. If you want some specifics to your context, I can talk more about those probably. Anyway, yeah.
Just to follow on from that, we were just talking about churches who do like special services for people. I mean, our church is involved in one that meets with another church called Crossroads that does a specific service for people with disabilities. There are churches who do kind of special services for people with ADHD who can't cope with sensory overload there. How much of this, and obviously some of what you've said is very obvious of how we include it in what we do every Sunday here. How much of this, how helpful do you think it is to have set aside spaces, and how much of this should we just be doing every week?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's really hard, because part of me wants to say the biblical vision is that the church gathers together and you communicate something by us all being together at the same time, and we're all equal. And the minute we start separating off, we are starting to, implied or otherwise, communicate they're not welcome here, or we're not willing to accommodate them, so let's find a way to accommodate them over here. That's not necessarily the heart behind it, but it's what can start to happen. That said, there are some things inherent in church, as I think the New Testament describes it, that some people find very hard to access. So I think it slightly depends what you're trying to do. So there are ways of doing kind of separate services that are more akin to a kind of Sunday school type approach of saying, we're trying to get teaching to appropriate levels. There are other things where I think actually you can probably accommodate that within your main service, you just need to think carefully. So is there a quieter bit of the building that you could kind of put a service stream into? Might that be a helpful thing? Would it be the case of saying there are certain seats that you can always reserve because you know that person finds it easy to be nearer an exit, so that they don't feel like there's sensory overload and there's no way to get out without it being everyone looking at me? So there's all kinds of things like that I want to say. You can actually do quite a lot with your normal church gatherings. I think there is probably a space sometimes, if it's done basically to say we're trying to communicate to a level that otherwise people won't understand, but we need to be quite careful how we articulate that, and I want that. For the person with learning disabilities, I can talk more about that because it's kind of, I guess, the area I've thought a bit more about, although our child is 7, so when they grow up it's more complicated. I kind of want to be saying it's church plus rather than this is instead of church.
I think the most common disability we would have in a normal church is a hearing disability by the Lord's Supper. And I think a lot more can be done to make everyone aware, those who take part publicly particularly, the speed of their speech, the clarity of their diction. It's not just about the amplification. I think it's about simple communication that a lot of us would benefit from.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm really a really bad example. I speak too fast and I slur my words a little bit, and I know that, and I try and work on that. But that is a huge thing, is how do we speak in a way, I'm now going to go really slow. How do we speak in a way that means we are able to be heard by everyone, both in terms of the language we choose to use, so not overly complicated language, and then in just how we use our words, what speed we say them, when we pause, how often we pause, all those kind of things. That's a hugely significant way we can help. Yeah.
I once went to a church where at the back there was a special seat for a lady who was disabled, so it was reserved for her. That's an example.
Yeah, it is, and it's a really good one. You know, are there people who the main thing stopping them coming to church is genuinely that it's physically painful? And if so, what can you physically do? There are lots of things, special chairs. We have one person who kind of lift a chair out of the foyer and carry it in, not her on it. That probably didn't need clarifying, did it? But just to find ways to just make people feel really comfortable. Like, you don't want someone sitting there in excruciating pain. Great. Let me recommend a couple more books. So there's Accessible Church, if you want to think about this stuff as a church. We're thinking more about just kind of, I've still got a slide. I said something theological. That slightly makes it sound like it's more complex than it is. It's not that complicated. I just need to find a sufficiently good other adjective. This just kind of walks you through a lot of the things I said this evening, but if you want to think about them in more detail. Disability in the Gospel is really good. That's Michael Beats. I quoted him a few times. Accessible Church, you can think about how it works out in church life. And then if you want something more devotional, so this is a great series more widely. So the 31-day Devotionals for Life series, they have something on basically everything. Anger, anxiety, assurance, chronic illness, contentment, doubt, fearing others, grief, hope, on and on the list could go. This is all on parenting and disabilities, particularly for those who are parenting children with disabilities. It kind of 31 days, a little bit of the Bible, reflects on something of this person's experience, and then something to reflect on, or two things to reflect on, and one thing to act on each day. Really bite-sized. If there's anyone in your church who's got a child with any diagnosis from anything like autism through to something much more kind of whole life affecting, kind of Down syndrome or something more like what my son has, that would be a really helpful thing to give them, or to buy 2 copies and read it with them so you can understand what their life experience is. I think that's me.